Hey folks, another video here about choice and argument in our 7th unit, really focusing in on how are we going to create stronger, more qualified, more complex arguments. So we're going to continue on with our ideas of how to create a qualified and complex argument here. We're going to start with kind of a theoretical question. If I were to ask you, do you like dogs? You'd probably give me a pretty binary answer, right? Yeah, I love dogs. No, I'm more of a cat person. But if we think about the spectrum of responses and a spectrum of kind of opinions on different things, it's rarely just cut and dry like this, right? There's a lot of gray area in the middle between I absolutely agree with this thing or I absolutely disagree with this thing. There are qualifications. For example, I sometimes like dogs when they're well behaved, or I like dogs when I'm not running and they're not chasing me, right? Then I can be a dog person, but I don't like them when I'm out for a run. So what I want us to think about is to try and live in this gray area and how to help yourself kind of carve out, okay, what part of the spectrum am I kind of arguing and writing for? So specifically, if we're going to create some qualified and sophisticated arguments, this is what we're going to look for, is we're going to try to avoid absolute and sort of define the parameters in which we're talking. So avoid those infinitives, the ones that are always or never, or other kind of superlatives, like the greatest threat to American society today is cell phones, right? I don't know if that's the greatest threat, right? It could be a great threat, it could be one of the great threats, but I don't know if I could qualify it. That would take a lot of argument for me to prove that cell phones are the greatest threat to American society. You'll also want to avoid those words like you or we. So if I said, when you think about the unknown, you might think about, outer space or the ocean floor. And immediately, right, what you're doing is you're pointing at the audience, your reader, and being like, hey, you need to think about this stuff. And if I don't think about that stuff, like if when I think about the unknown, maybe I think about my own personal future, I don't think about the ocean or outer space, immediately you've taken me out of your argument. You've kind of disqualified me from going along with your thoughts because you are already out on a different tangent. So instead, qualify those. So when you think about the unknown, instead of say, when some people think about the unknown, here are the things that frequently come up, right? You're not going to say that they always come up, but maybe commonly, sometimes, often, those types of qualifying words to say, like, this is generally the case as I see it, but maybe it's not the infinitive case, right? It's not always going to be there. So we're also going to want to avoid generalizations and be specific, both in the evidence that we're choosing to use and the analysis of that evidence. The more specific, the more like drilled down you can get, the more sophisticated and qualified your argument is going to be. So if we're talking about something like gun control, right? Get specific. Like, what kind of gun control are we talking about here? Because if I just say we need more gun control, that's a huge argument. Or to say, like, we don't need any gun control, you're saying, like, cool, so I should be able to go buy some bazookas and like a tank. Like, what are we talking about in terms of armaments here? Get specific in what we're referencing. And then specifically to create some more sophistication, go beyond the obvious. So see what is obviously there, right? You want to talk about those immediate questions that might pop into someone's mind if we talk about some like broad topics like gun control, or if we're experiencing and reflecting on this idea of the unknown in the human experience. So we want to address it, recognize it, and then push further. So my favorite game to play when I'm writing is, as I'm working to finish up a paragraph, I think to myself, okay, I just wrote 3 or 4 or 5 sentences. So what? Why does any of this matter? And if I can answer that question, so what? That means I'm not done writing that paragraph, or I'm not done writing this paper, that I probably need to go through and be more specific in addressing, okay, why is this important? What else is there that I'm not initially seeing that can help me qualify my argument a little bit better? So some good qualifying words that you might want to use are sometimes known as thamos or swabbies. These are words that help us qualify. So therefore, however, although, moreover, otherwise, or since, while, as, because, if I'm tossing these words in, it's usually helping me get to more complex ideas and more specific ideas. Let me show you an example of this. Since the beginning of American history, conflict has arisen over the idea of eminent domain, or the ability of government to take control of privately owned land. And immediately I'm kind of like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a really, really big statement. Let's be careful with this. Since the beginning of American history, like this, as soon as the Declaration of Independence was signed, people were like, this is going to be a problem, right? Eminent domain is going to be an issue. I'd be careful with this one. So while I think this is a great example, this is an example of maybe what not to do. So based on constitutional advocacies and beliefs in personal freedoms, many Americans oppose the idea. Don't say all Americans, don't say Americans oppose the idea, but there's a lot of people who do. And then take a look at their thesis statement. Look at the qualifications that they add into this. So although eminent domain can sometimes be a cause for concern, it can be perfectly productive and beneficial when a utilitarian approach of supporting the most people is taken in. Two qualifications in their thesis. So they address the counter argument, like, hey, this can be a big problem, right? If the government's just running around taking people's land in the name of good faith. But when we take this kind of approach, so specifically when we look at it in a utilitarian fashion, that's when it becomes a good idea. So this is a great, specific, qualified argument that I know exactly where this person is going. And then take a look at the beginning of their next paragraph. So when laws allowing eminent domain are used unfairly, it can have extremely negative outcomes. So right out the bat, right after they give me their brief little introduction, they go into this counterclaim just to kind of address, hey, I know that this issue is going to come up, so I'm going to address it. I'm going to address the obvious, and that's going to help me push further to get to the more specific, the kind of the ideas underneath these obvious outcomes of might be a problem if the government just runs around taking people's land. So again, just for a little more zoomed in look, the qualification and specificity here is essential for a sophisticated argument. So although eminent domain can sometimes be a cause for concern, great qualification, it can be perfectly productive. It can be, not say it will be, not say it always is, but it can be perfectly productive and beneficial when this specific approach, this utilitarian approach of supporting people is taken. So that's what we're working for as we write our own arguments. As you're analyzing other arguments, be looking for these qualifications, because they're great things that you can bring up and mention on a rhetorical analysis. All right. Good luck, folks.